Hello everyone. This is not a normal episode. Welcome to the Halloween special of Twitch Tea Time. I will be your spooky host for tonight's episode. We have a lineup of spooky guests telling us about their spooky adventures with Halloween, horror movies, even telling us a very spooky story. Stay tuned for all the spooks tonight. Let's begin with Andy Havoc.
Hello everybody, Andy Havoc here. I just wanted to talk to you a little bit about my horror experience. Thank you, Blue, for putting this together as well. I appreciate that. So, I play a few horror games nowadays. You know, Phasmophobia, Demonologist, a few of the big-time horror games now. I love a lot of Lethal Company, anything with a jump scare, but I wasn't always like that. It's funny that I play those things now because I was never big into horror games or movies or anything really growing up. I was always a little afraid of things like that. But not because I necessarily believed in it, but just more that creepy kind of like unsettling feeling you get with that stuff. It's always had this weird like place. So I lived back East Coast in Maryland, and we were really probably a few miles away from where they filmed the Blair Witch Project, and so that was like, you know, this big talking point thing. A lot of woods, a lot of trees. It's very different from where I live now. So there was always that fear of kind of like, oh man, trees, woods, you know, people disappear and things like that. That was always like the horror classic, you know, one of those big tropes that was in movies and shows and stuff is like, oh, the forest is taking people, or, you know, there's spirits or something living in there. I was never like a haunted house guy, so that didn't bother me. It was always pretty interesting. It was just like woods and things like that. Like I liked hanging out in the woods, but during the day, if it ever got a little dark out there, I started to get this like creepy, unsettling feeling. So, like I say, the Blair Witch Project was filmed very close. It was a very, you know, one of those creepy kind of like handheld, recorded first-person perspective movies, and that also gave me this weird, unsettling feeling. It's like, wow, I feel like I'm really in this. It's uncomfortable, you know? And when I watch movies, you know, the rare times I do, or TV shows or anything like that, I like to enjoy like a laugh or just take my mind off of the stresses of life, things like that. And so, you know, the horror movies were opposite. It was like, oh, now I'm in this. I'm getting a little nervous, a little worked up. And it was the same with games. I played a lot of video games that were, you know, very upbeat, lighthearted, you know, like a Banjo-Kazooie or something, where it was one of my favorite games because it was such a fun, colorful, like jokey kind of game. There was never a place for like horror games because I thought, man, I don't want to, you know, come home from school or something and then all of a sudden I'm stressed out playing this game where, you know, I got to stay alive and I'm scared of, you know, these ghosts jumping out, jump scares, things like that. And I'm the jumpiest person alive. So it's just one of those things where I find it funny how I've transitioned now from somebody who was like, I don't want to do a thing with horror, to like, now I'm all about the horror games. Like mainly I play, you know, Phasmophobia, Lethal Company, things like that. And I'm yelling, I'm jumping, there's tons of jump scare clips and stuff. But it's gone for me from a place of, this is truly creepy, unsettling, terrifying, to it's kind of funny, you know, and humor has always kind of connected me in a weird way to the horror community and just like horror in general. So, you know, you go from growing up kind of where, you know, there's this lore, this like, oh, the Blair Witch Project was filmed like right in your backyard, essentially. Actually, where I worked, it was 95 acres of woods with a few different like oasis of campground and things like that, and I would take care of the facilities. So you're there at, you know, 4 a.m., 3 a.m., you're there past midnight to open and close the places, and so it was very dark, it was woods, and the movie was filmed like, I mean, less than a mile away from that area, but, you know, you'd hear the wildlife. It was always really, really creepy and unsettling, just like, you know, a lot of that stuff is, but you're kind of like right in it. So moving out east or out west from the East Coast now, I feel like I have kind of disconnected from that more physical horror, more physical, like, you know, I'm in the woods and it's kind of scary at night, you know, wildlife, all that. to now I'm doing it online with the games and everything like that. I still don't really watch horror movies though. I've always been, like I say, very kind of shy, I guess, when it comes to the movie industry in general. I don't really watch movies. I don't, I just, to me, I like experiences more, and so I've just never been a big movie guy. So the horror movies never really kind of, got me. However, a few friends wanted to go see, like, Saw when it came out. I think we saw, like, Saw 3 or something when it came out. And, that was more of a gore movie than a horror movie, but they kind of go hand in hand a little bit. And so I was, like, just sitting there the whole time, like, I'm here for my friends. I'm here for my friends. It was very bad. Like, I mean, I wasn't freaking out or anything, but it was just funny because I'm like, this is so far out of my element at the time. What is going on here? But it's just funny how all that stuff kind of like, came full circle. And now here I am like, yeah, I'm going to, play this scary game and I'm going to yell and jump every 5 minutes, but it is what it is now. So just kind of funny how we kind of grow and evolve with that stuff. For me, since Halloween is here, I was never like a, horror fan. Like I say, I didn't dislike the franchises or anything like that, but I was always more of like, I was into the, I can be whoever I want to be on this day. So that's always been Halloween for me, is like, if I feel like there's one day where I can just forget about myself for a day, I'm not, no work, no responsibilities, just literally be a different person for a day. It's this, not that there's anything like bad going on or anything like that, or I want to get away from anything, but it's just cool to be like, hey, I could be this, superhero today. I could be this other profession today. I could dress up like Loba from Apex or whatever. You know what I mean? Like, it's just something very out of the ordinary that I would not normally put any kind of effort into. It's like, hey, this is a day just to put effort into being somebody else or something else, and just having a good time and just kind of like letting it all ride on the vibe. So recently, especially moving out here, there's a great community of Halloween fans and people that get together, doing the pumpkin carving, doing like Halloween parties and stuff. I had never done any of that stuff kind of growing up. I was always working or just too tired or introverted to do it. Now though, Halloween's a great excuse to get together with other people, hang out. There's like, of course, costume parties. You got to dress up. You got to, be somebody else or something else or whatever. But there's little games you can play with that. And it's just a great way of getting together, To me, it's just been an excuse, just like most holidays are, to get together and just enjoy the vibes of people you love or, care about without it being one of those like, oh, it's got deeper meaning to it. I love celebrating a birthday. I love celebrating any kind of holidays, but this to me feels like a day for all of us to just kind of like, hey, let's push all of the norms to the side and just be us. We have an excuse to just be who we want, whatever we want, whenever we want, on this day. And that's kind of what it means to me. Of course, I like the candy though. I mean, the candy's a great perk of Halloween. That's always been something I greatly enjoy. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, like coming out here, it's funny because, like I say, I left that physical, like we're surrounded by woods kind of horror experience in the East Coast, and now I'm out here, and it's more about just kind of embracing that that horror community and genre a little bit more with friends and kind of out and about with people, especially like I'm in Las Vegas right now, and so it's cool. Like downtown, they just have all kinds of Halloween themed stuff. The city goes all out for everything, really. So it's cool to have that more Halloween kind of vibe, more party vibe than like, hey, I'm actually scared here. I've been to a couple of those like haunted corn mazes and stuff like that, and I was never afraid of that. But at the same time, that atmosphere, when you start thinking about it, it's like, boy, this is kind of weird. This is a little eerie. It's a cool feeling. It's a rush. But yeah, I've always been a little more reserved when it comes to the horror stuff. I'm kind of, I mean, you guys know, I'm kind of scared of everything. So it's just one of those deals. But yeah, that's been my experience with Halloween, and a couple of cool things that I've kind of grown up with. But yeah, that's my experience, y'all. And Blue, again, thank you for putting this together. I appreciate you very much, and I cannot wait to hear some more. All right, have a good one, y'all.
And now we have jaQUILLyn, all the way from Australia.
Halloween isn't really a big event in Australia, but it doesn't mean that we don't enjoy a good horror story. My sister and I used to bond writing horror stories together as kids. I still remember the first one I did. It was absolutely terrible. It was about a moon that was evil and used to fry everyone with its laser eyes, and hers weren't much better than mine, honestly. And I think that quality time spent with my sister doing those sort of things made horror stories almost a safe place for me. So from there, it went on to the nights where you couldn't sleep. I would read creepypastas, look them up and find the top-rated ones and just use them to settle my mind to get into a place where I could fall asleep. And from there, when I was a bit older, I ended up doing the same thing but on Reddit, finding all the paranormal channels. And I'm not sure what I believe, but I definitely like to keep an open mind about those things. Because who knows, really? Who knows? And if you enjoy reading about it, if you enjoy thinking about it, then what's the harm in that? So I started reading people's stories and reading about all those sort of, you know, the scary things and the potential mystery animals and people that live out in the bush and spirits and whatnot. And I just really enjoyed it. From there, it was all about the TV shows, the ghost hunting TV shows, the supernatural. And again, that was quality time I was spending with my family and just ways to bond. And then I got into horror novels. So authors like James Herbert, I think his stories are so dark and horrible, but they're so beautifully written that you can't stop reading even when you really want to. No matter how horrible it gets, you just think, oh, this writing's so beautiful. I can just visualize everything for better or for worse. I found it a lot easier, especially while pregnant, to listen rather than read. So I used to put horror narrators from YouTube on and podcasts from Spotify on while I was trying to sleep, same as the creepypastas when I was younger. And I would listen to people like Papa Scare and Creepy Oz. I still do, still love listening to their channels. They seem like really nice people as well from what you see of them as a viewer for their channel. And I'd listen to them narrate horror stories that they'd found online. And again, it's funny. I know that some people listen to crime podcasts to relax. For me, it's horror stories. From there, I thought it'd be nice to have a way to be more interactive with these things. So I found Twitch and started looking up horror streamers on Twitch and found a really amazing community. And through that, I found so many amazing people and made so many amazing friendships and found some really odd games and some really fun games. So I feel like everyone's go-to is definitely the Resident Evils because they're easy to play. They've got recognizable characters, a decent storyline, and if you get stuck, there's always a walkthrough to find. I've also played some really hilarious ones like Poop Killer from itch.io and some fun kind of retro ones, indie developed ones, and all sorts. Personally, I like retro games. I really liked Cultic. I don't know if it'd be described as a horror game or more like a first-person shooter gore kind of game, somewhere in between. But I really enjoy those sort of games where it's quite linear, but also there's a bit of puzzles, a bit of action. I really enjoy that sort of thing. And yes, now I kind of go between watching my favorite horror streamers, listening to my favorite horror narrators, and watching people who do paranormal and ghost hunting, people like Kelsey Davies. She is one of those people that I like to keep an open mind about, and there are a couple of other ones as well that I just like to watch, and I just think it's something really, really interesting, something really, really fun, and who doesn't like a good scare, really? And yeah, that's been my experience.
Where the heck did I put it? Oh, sorry, we're back. I think I dropped my pumpkin somewhere. Anyways, our next guest is FredTheRandom. He's gonna be telling us about All Hallows Eve and his experience with Halloween.
So, Halloween in the UK can be traced back to ancient Celtic festival of Samhain. Now, this was about 2,000 years ago. So a little bit of context, back in those days, and particularly in the medieval period as well, the sort of life was split into 4 sections of the seasons. And Samhain is sort of in between autumn and so the Christmas. And back in sort of 2,000 years ago, the Celts were essentially like an agricultural people, sort of pre-Christian. And as I said, they were dependent on the seasons, and Samhain essentially means end of the summer, and particularly the harvest, and the beginning of a darker, colder winter. It is sort of a festival at the time that was a sort of in between the world of the living and the world of the dead. And it was also believed that the dead would revisit the mortal world. This is where bonfires come from. So villagers across England would light bonfires to ward off evil spirits. That it would be sort of conducted by priests who were actually called druids at the time, which is really interesting. That's where that sort of culture comes from. And then little army called the Romans came over and conquered a lot of these lands. There was a goddess called, which is really important, called Pomona. So she was sort of a goddess that often was depicted with apples, and this is where the traditional bobbing of the apple comes from. So you'll go to Halloween events, and you'll have like kids or regarding bobbing for apples. So basically, it's like a fun kids game at these festivals, and here's another thing as well. So the Celts used to draw, sort of, and used to carve out flames and candles in things like turnips. And this is where the whole idea of later on with the pumpkins came into it, because it came from sort of vegetables. So that's where that comes from as well. That's the historical context of where that comes from. But when as the Christians came over to arrive from St. Augustine from Rome, we're talking sort of 597 AD. They landed in my county, Kent. Now they came up with a festival called All Hallows Day, otherwise known as All Saints Day, to remember all those that died for their beliefs. Now originally, Halloween used to be on the 13th of May. So it always used to traditionally be in May, but it wasn't until there was a pope called Gregory the I. I think it was Gregory the I. Well, we're going to call him Pope Gregory, who moved Halloween's original day, which was in May, to I think it was in the 1st of November. That was to assimilate and to essentially merge the Celtic Samhain festival of the rising of the dead, to put it in line with the Christian celebration, and that's when it became what it is known to from that point up until to probably we don't really know for the 18th, 19th century, but up until that point it was called All Hallows Eve, which is where that comes from. And then obviously later on it became Halloween to what we know it today. Now in Britain, Halloween has traditionally been celebrated, as I said, from the bobbing of the apples in water, telling ghost stories, as I said before, carving of vegetables, and illuminating evil spirits by putting either lanterns or candles in the windows. The Americanization of this is the pumpkin and the trick or treat, or the jack-o'-lanterns, what the Americans call, we call them the pumpkin. That is something that is, something that's come from American culture. That's not a British thing. Something that we have now since subsequently adopted. We didn't used to do this, we now do this. That's come from sort of horror films and from TV shows over in this country, within the UK. So we've sort of over time adapted to different cultures, and from the Celts to the Romans to the British Christian festival of harvest to what it is now, which is the Americanization of the outfits, the parties, the costumes. That's all pretty new here, because a lot of people don't like trick-or-treating over here. It isn't something that's is really widely done. If anything, you'll see quite a lot of people block doors or not allow trick-or-treaters to go to the door. So it is pretty much an American tradition. But that is pretty much what All Halloween or All Hallows Eve or what Halloween is in the United Kingdom. So it is a 2,000-year-old celebration.
I want him dead now. You understand? I don't want him alive. Just end him now. Oh, I'll get back to you. Sorry about that. I was rehearsing for a play. Anyways, let's hear what EmzOnStream has to tell us about Halloween.
Hey guys, I'm EmzOnStream. Thank you, Blue Sea, for inviting me to take part in this. Halloween is a strange one for me because I'm a mum now, so it's all about my two children. So I spend my whole Halloween walking around doing trick-and-treating with my 8 and my 5-year-old. They dress up. They always want mummy to dress up, but not my thing. Not walking around the streets in an outfit. I don't mind doing it on stream and things like that for parties, but not for the trick-or-treating. So yeah, I spend my Halloween basically walking around houses saying trick-or-treat to strangers to try and get sweets off of them, which sounds a bit strange, but anyway, it's we've been doing this. I mean, the UK is very, very big on trick-or-treating. It has got to the point now though where trick-or-treating isn't really tricks because people are too worried to upset people with a trick. So when we were young, me and my brothers, we used to always ask for tricks, and people weren't so afraid of things like that. So lots of people did say trick. And I remember my brother pouring water on people's heads from the bedroom window, throwing flour at their face when they opened the door. It was just, we were quite cruel actually, but I don't think you get away with it now. I think you probably get the police on your door. But yeah, Halloween as a child was amazing. I've got so many memories because my family used to do Halloween parties every year when we were kids with the family and with friends. So my mum would always host it. And we now if you're an 80s, 90s baby, you will from the UK, you will feel me on this. But we all used to have bin liners as outfits, and maybe some makeup on our face, and there's pictures and memes all over Facebook that just remind me it's all these kids having their photo taken with just bin bags on. So that was us. We did that every year, bin bags. And we used to play things like bobbing apples, where you'd stick your head in the water and try and get your apple out. We used to do Maltesers in flour, which is always brilliant after bobbing with apples, because flour and water, as you can imagine, don't mix well. So that Maltesers and flour is literally just sticking your head in flour and picking out as many Maltesers with your mouth and not using your hands. Obviously, carving pumpkins was a massive thing, but we used to always kind of like have a bonfire, actually, strangely. Not on Halloween night. We used to have it. Not Halloween night. Not on firework night. We used to have it round Halloween. We used to all do a bonfire, and we used to have like, which is strange because bonfire night is the 5th of November, but we used to always have bonfire without Halloween, which actually now sounds really odd, but we definitely did. And we'd have hot dogs, and we'd have jacket potatoes, and my nan used to always cook leek and potato soup, and it was one of our favourites, and we couldn't wait to have it. And yeah, we would just keep the party at home and just really, really just have fun. Now, obviously, as an adult, if I go to a Halloween party, alcohol's involved. I've had a few actually at my house, invited all the friends and all the kiddies. But again, it's all about the kids. And then, yeah, the adults get wasted and the kids stay up really late and misbehave. So Halloween's always been fun, but it is less fun as you get into an adult. Obviously, streaming. I've been able to do, I think, one Halloween so far. So this Halloween, I will be dressing up and doing a Halloween stream, which I'm really looking forward to. And obviously, Halloween comes with horror. Now, obviously, I am a horror. Well, not a horror streamer really, I'm an absolute wuss, but I try these horror games, and obviously DBD is one of my main games, and it's nice to see some of the killers in there, because like Ghosty was one of the most epic movies as I grew up as a teenager. Scream, obviously. I used to go to the cinema with my best friend Amy, and we used to go on our own, and we used to scare the lives out of each other, get the bus home and walk in the dark, and it was horrible. We were so scared for the next 2 days afterwards. Now look at them, they're bloody stupid, aren't they, the films? But yeah, I've watched all horror movies. Hostel was one of my, if you know me already, I jump all the time at the strangest things. So I'm not really into jumpy movies, but I do like gross movies. I do like Saws. Hostel, one of the most messed up films, but I loved it, absolutely loved it. And the ankles got slashed. So yeah, I'm a bit into kind of those kind of horrors more than the actual like ghost and jumpy and but one of my earliest memories of horror movies was I Know What You Did Last Summer. I think it must have been the first one where he's in the back of the car. And I watched that. I remember my mum and my brother going out, my older brother and my mum going out. And I sat in the back room with the doors wide open in the pitch black watching a horror movie. Absolutely scared the life out of me. For some reason, the thrill was pretty cool, pretty epic. But yeah, I don't really watch horror movies as I've got older. I mean, we went to see the new Alien. Is that classed as a horror? Don't really know. Saw that. I just don't think they're made the same, or they don't reach me the same. They don't do the same thing as they did when I was young, when you were actually scared. But I am scared of walking in the dark on my own in real life. Like, as I've got older and I've got children, things like that terrify me. So I've become a bit more of a wuss and aware of situations and the fact that there is real life serial killers out there. It's not just on movies and TVs. So yeah, I don't have any franchises that I really love, that I'm addicted to, obsessed with, know every word to. It's not really. I'm not really like that with films and TV series. But yeah, I mean, I like horror in general. You know, if you give me a horror, I'll watch it. I watched Little Legs or Long Legs or whatever it was the other day that came out in the cinema. That was really odd, but again, not scary. So yeah, I mean, if somebody told me a really, really scary movie, I'd probably want to watch it. But yeah, I'm not really fast. But Halloween, yeah, as I say, Halloween is a big thing, and it's just lovely, and it's autumn. And the pumpkins, not sure what that is, pumpkin carving with my kids, picking up pumpkins. But as I say, as I got older and you're a mum, it's all about your children rather than yourself. So yeah, no, that's my kind of experiences with Halloween, really. And yeah, I hope that was fun to listen to. Yeah, I'm a wuss. I absolutely suck. And if you do watch me, all I do is spend my whole life jumping. And even as a killer main on DVD, I'm actually jumping at the survivors, which isn't great. So, yeah. Don't watch a movie with me. Don't watch a horror movie with me, because I'll probably scare you more than the actual horror movie. But yeah, guys, thank you so much for listening. And Lucy, thank you so much, my gorgeous boy. I love you so much. And yeah, go and enjoy Halloween. This is Halloween. I think that's the Geo. I don't even know where that's from. This is Halloween. I don't know. It's from something. I don't even know what it's from. But anyway, guys, thank you so much. I have been EmzOnStream, and yeah, enjoy. Mwah!
Our next guest is MichaelNothing. He is experienced with movies and he loves the spoopy stuff. And he's very squishy. Let's hear what he has to say.
Hi, I'm MichaelNothing, and I was going to talk a little bit about my experience with the spooky games. It's kind of funny because I've always liked spooky stuff since I was really young. Even as a kid, I was always checking out books from the library if it was spooky, and anything that was Halloween related or had ghosts on it, I was always what? Goosebumps books and all that crap. But anyway, so there's kind of natural progression for me. But my first favorite spooky game was this game, and I talk about it all the time on my stream, is Clock Tower for the PS1. And I still have my original copy, and it's funny because that game and my love for that game led me to some of my favorite horror movies, because the inspirations for that game were some Argento films from back in the day, ironically starring Jennifer Connelly, who was the girl from Labyrinth. And so the main character in Clock Tower looks just like her, and I remembered playing it being wow, this character really looks like Jennifer Connelly. And it turns out because she was literally modeled after Jennifer Connelly in our Argento film called Phenomena. And it's about a little girl who talks to bugs, and she's attacked by this little boy with scissors. And it's not really a spoiler, but well, I guess it kind of is. But then the main character of Clock Tower is Scissor Man, chasing a girl that looks just like Jennifer Connelly. So it led me down an Argento wiki hole when I was young. And so then, and then I got really into Argento films, and I've always been into films. I mean, I went to film school, but it definitely, piqued that side of, my interest in films and stuff. So it's just kind of funny how my favorite horror video game is so tied to my favorite horror films in that way, because I really love Argento. And my favorite scary movie of all time actually is an Argento film called Suspiria. But yeah, it all circles back. But I, like a lot of people, played the original Resident Evil games too. They were a big part of my life because it was the newest thing we had, and it just nailed it. It felt like playing a horror movie. And it was tough as nails back in the day. I forgot how hard it was. It's funny to go back to the tank controls and be like, oh my god, I can't believe I played like this. But yeah. So that's kind of my beginning with horror games. And I never really even meant to be a horror streamer. I just love horror games, and my aesthetic is usually horror anyway. So it's funny when people are like, well, you're a horror streamer, and I'm like, I guess I am. Because I also like cozy games randomly, but it's just in my blood. Since, like I said, since I was a kid, it's just I'm all about the spooky. But yeah, and then I do have a ghost story that happened to me, which is kind of funny. And I was 19, and I was on a trip with friends to New Orleans, and we were on a haunted ghost tour. Of course we were. And we were in this alley, and we had just got there. We'd all just kind of stopped, and the tour guide started talking, and somebody scratched me like really hard on the back of my arm. Like it felt like somebody was mad. And then I turned around and nobody was there, but my friend was a couple steps behind me. So I assumed it was him, like, picking on me. So I was like, I flipped him the bird, and it was like, you're such a jerk, you're such an asshole. That hurt really bad. And he was like, what? And then the guy was talking, so I didn't want to, like, make a scene, obviously, because the tour guide was telling us about the area. So I turned back around to listen to the tour guide, and the tour guide started talking about how where we were is used to be a holding area for slaves when they got off the ship, and they used to force them to stay in this little alley, and sometimes when people are there they feel somebody touch them, and it was just, I was like, what? And so then I thought it was a joke, so I thought somebody had scratched me, and then he just happened to say that to make it like look like, you know, I was set up, but that's not what happened. Like, and my friend swears he didn't scratch me, and I had a big red welt on the back of my arm for the rest of the tour. So, yeah, that was pretty spooky. Because normally I'm the kind of guy that, like, somebody will tell me a house is haunted. They'll be like, that empty house is haunted. And I'm like, all right, I'm going inside. And I'll go in the basement. And I'll be like, where is it? You know? I like the spooky stuff. But that was the most realistic ghost experience I think I've ever had, was being scratched in New Orleans. But yeah, nothing's ever been quite like that intense since. But yeah, there you go, Lucy. It's 5 minutes, sorry. And I rambled too. Have a good one, dude.
This is very delicious. Sorry about that, guys. I was eating something. I was not expecting you to be back a little bit soon. Sorry. I hope you enjoyed Michael's segment, because now we have Dutchessy telling us about Halloween in the Netherlands and her experiences with spooky stuff. Let's hear what Dutchessy has to tell us about Halloween.
I will tell you about some weird and spooky myths in the Netherlands. If you ever visit a town called Utrecht in the Netherlands, and you go to the corner of the streets Ellingenhof and Ouwegracht, or look it up on Google Maps, you would find a big boulder that is chained to a wall. The stone has been there even before 1520. Now, why would someone chain a boulder to a wall? Well, the story goes that something weird has been going on with the stone. After midnight, if you would stick a needle in one of the bleak stone veins, blood would come out. And this wasn't all. No. At night, evil spirits, giants, witches and wizards would come to the stone and dance around it. They would roll the boulder over the street, back and forth, over the Vollersbridge, over the Oudegracht, to the Geerte Bridge and back, making so much noise that the citizens of Utrecht couldn't sleep. But you don't mock giants, wizards, witches and evil spirits. So people held a nightly procession to ban all the evil spirits and such into the dark waters of the gracht. The mold, we would say. And to make sure they never return to play with the boulder again, they chained it to the wall. Have you ever heard of a basilisk? It is a creature that serves the devil. They say that in a town called Dokkum in the Netherlands, it killed 18 people with the fire that came out of its eyes. And it also happened to a town called Oldenburn. 18 people died. They say that in Alderborn it was settled in an old deep well, and that makes sense because they say it was afraid of bright light. A basilisk is like a giant lizard. He has a ridge of spines on his back, a tail full of scales that rattle with every movement. But the worst is his head. That's a monster head with a large red mouth and vicious protruding teeth, and its nostrils are like caves from which it spews clouds of stinking breath. The most terrible thing in that head are the eyes. They are round balls from which glowing fire radiates. It's as if flames are bursting out. When you look into it, that flame penetrates into you and goes to your heart and surrounds it and consumes the heart. And then it continues to consume you from within until you are nothing but a pile of ashes. Once there was a basilisk in a town called Utrecht in the Netherlands. It was the biggest monster that ever roamed this earth. It was born from a rooster egg and hatched by a turtle. When it was born, it crawled into the deep dark basement of a beer brewery. It felt it would be safe there and was waiting for its victims there. A workman came and never returned. A boss came and never returned. Whoever dared to go into the basement lost their lives. There are many that lost their lives before they found out there was a basilisk in that basement. They locked the door so no one could go in, and the basilisk stayed in there. Every now and then a hero came and tried to fight the basilisk. They came with a weapon and armor. But every time there was hardly a fight. Before a thought could be raised or an arrow could be shot, fire would come out of its eyes and turn them into ashes. All died. This went on for years, more than a century, and the casualties grew and grew. Then, one day, a young man who had barely outgrown his infancy presented himself. He was tall, slim, blonde hair flowing around his temples. He was a pure boy. All evil was foreign to him. Cleanliness and innocence radiated from his blue eyes. People said, You want to kill the basilisk? And he said, Yes, I am going to. No, the people said, You are not entering this basement. You don't even have a weapon. He pointed at a wooden plate he carried on his chest and asked them to blindfold him. They refused. Then he did it himself. They wanted to stop him and save him, but he was so self-assured that they finally let him go in. He opened the door and went down the stairs. His feet were searching for the steps down, but he had no fear or worries in his heart. He reached the floor of the basement and heard the rattle of the scales. That was the basilisk. A stinking breath went past his face. It was the breath that the basilisk let out in anger. But it didn't bother the young man. He squeezed his eyes shut. He stepped forward a few steps to where he knew the basilisk was. The foul beast sniffed and hellish fire shot out of his eyes towards the intruder. Then a storm began to snarl in his throat. Did his fire not hit a target? The young man now took another few steps. Then his hands grasped the plate in front of his chest and turned it over. The basilisk was staring into a mirror. It jumped back with a wild roar, but it was too late. The mirror reflected the fire back into the eyes it came out of, and a deadly flame engulfed his own heart. He made another desperate leap, roaring wildly. Then he sank down, his tail rattling. The flames ate into his body and consumed him. A pile of ashes remained at the feet of his young opponent. The people in Utrecht could breathe again. The beast was gone, and the young man was a hero.
And now it is my turn. I will be telling you about our Halloween here, precisely where I live in Lebanon. So we don't celebrate Halloween on October 31st here. Usually it's called Saint Barbara's Day, also called the Feast of Saint Barbara. It's a holiday annually celebrated on December 17th for the Gregorian calendar, or December 4th for the Julian calendar amongst Middle Eastern Christians in Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Palestine, Turkey, to name a few. And it is also celebrated as Barbaroba amongst Christians in the country of Georgia. Beyond its observance within Christian communities, it's also celebrated among the Alawite communities in certain regions. So it is mostly observed by Russia Christians, also, as I said, in Lebanon, Palestine, Jordan, Turkey, Georgia, and sometimes in France as well. The celebration of Saint Barbara shares many elements with Halloween, though coming from a much earlier tradition and unrelated to the Feast of the Dead. Traditionally, adults and children wear disguise, go around houses in the villages dancing and singing the story of Saint Barbara, and in each house they are either offered food, sometimes they are offered money, especially prepared for that feast. So the food we have is the food we make for that feast is a little bit of wheat that we boil. We add sugar to it, and we serve it in water as well. Sometimes some people serve it with milk. So that's wheat grains boiled in hot water. You add sugar to it, and you serve it and eat it. This is a traditional thing every Saint Barbara, especially for that feast. The general belief amongst Levantine or Levantine Christians is that Saint Barbara disguised herself as many different characters to elude the Romans who were persecuting her. So what I remember from it is that her father wanted to marry her, to get her to marry actually someone who's like much older. So she was forced to. So the story of Saint Barbara, as I've been told as a kid, is that her father wanted her to marry a much older guy, and she didn't want to. So she fled. She ran away, and it was believed that she was miraculously saved from persecution while fleeing. and she ran through freshly planted wheat seeds or wheat fields, which grew instantly to cover her path and hide her. But she was later found by people, and she was killed or murdered just for that reason as well. Because, people back in the day didn't believe in witchcraft or miracles or anything. They were so superstitious. So this is the story from what I remember. And while she ran away, she was disguised to hide herself, so that no one can identify her or even rat on her. So this is where the disguises come from. But there's the aspect of giving money. I think it's a bad thing to do, okay, give away food, give away candy. That's the story basically of our Halloween. We wear costumes every year on December 4th to commemorate that day. And as I said, we eat cooked wheat with sugar. And some of us plant the wheat as well in small cups. You don't have to get a huge planter for that, and you give it away, probably different kinds of seeds, and some of them even keep this tradition up till Christmas, the planting thing. So this is basically our Halloween. I hope you guys enjoyed. I know I bored you guys, but I was also making sure everything was accurate and fact checking on Google as well. That's basically it. And now we have my friend JR Cash, or JR_Cash1. He is gonna be telling us the spookiest, bloodiest, well, not bloodiest, but still, he's gonna be telling us about the monkey paw story. The monkey paw that you see in Phasmophobia? That story. Let's listen carefully.
The Monkey's Paw by W. W. Jacobs. Without, the night was cold and wet, but in the small parlor of Laburnum Villa, the blinds were drawn and the fire burned brightly. Father and son were at chess, the former, who possessed ideas about the game involving radical chances, putting his king into such a sharp and unnecessary perils that it even provoked comment from the white-haired old lady knitting placidly by the fire. "Hark at the wind," said Mr. White, who, having seen a fatal mistake after it was too late, was amiably desirous of preventing his son from seeing it. "I'm listening," said the latter grimly, surveying the board as he stretched out his hand. "Check. I should hardly think that he's come tonight," said his father, with his hand poised over the board. "Mate," replied his son. "That's the worst of living so far out," bawled Mr. White. "Of all the beastly, slushy, out-of-the-way places to live in, this is the worst. Path's a bog, and the road's a torrent. I don't even know what people are thinking about. I suppose, because only 2 horses in the road are let, they think it doesn't matter." "Never mind, dear," said his wife soothingly. "Perhaps you'll win the next one." Mr. White looked up sharply, just in time to intercept a knowing glance between mother and son. The words died away on his lips, and he hid a guilty grin in his thin gray beard. "There he is," said Herbert White, as the gate banged too loudly and heavy footsteps came towards the door. The old man rose with a hospitable haste, and opening the door, was heard condoling with the new arrival. The new arrival also condoled with himself, so that Mrs. White said, "Tut, tut," and coughed gently as her husband entered the room, followed by a tall, burly man, beady of eye and rubicund of visage. "Sergeant Major Morris," he said, introducing him. The sergeant major shook hands and, taking the preferred seat by the fire, watched contentedly as his host got out whiskey and tumblers and stood by a small copper kettle on the fire. At the third glass, his eyes got brighter, and he began to talk. The little family circle regarding with eager interest this visitor from distant parts as he squared his broad shoulders in the chair and spoke of wild scenes of doughty deeds, of wars and plagues, and strange peoples. 21 years of it, said Mr. White, nodding at his wife and son. When he went away, he was a slip of youth in the warehouse. Now look at him. He don't look to have taken much harm, said Mrs. White politely. I'd like to go to India myself, said the old man, just to look around a bit, you know. Better where you are, said the sergeant major. Shaking his head, he put down the empty glass and, sighing softly, shook it again. I should like to see those old temples and fakirs and jugglers, said the old man. What was that you started telling me the other day, about a monkey's paw or something, Morris? Nothing, said the soldier hastily. Leastways, nothing worth hearing. Monkey's paw? Said Mrs. White curiously. Well, it's just a bit of what you might call magic, perhaps, said the sergeant major offhandedly. His three listeners leaned forward eagerly. The visitor absent-mindedly put his empty glass to his lips, and then he set it down again. His host filled it for him again. To look at it, said the sergeant major, fumbling in his pocket, it's just an ordinary little paw, dried to a mummy. He took something out of his pocket and preferred it. Mrs. White drew back with a grimace, but her son, taking it, examined it curiously. And what is there special about it? Inquired Mr. White as he took it from his son, and having examined it, placed it upon the table. I had a spell put on it by an old fakir, said the sergeant major, a very holy man. He wanted to show that fate ruled people's lives, and that those who inferred with it did so at their sorrow. He put a spell on it so that 3 separate men could each have 3 wishes from it. His manners were so impressive that his hearers were conscious that their light laughter had jarred somewhat. Well, why don't you have 3, sir? Said Herbert White cleverly. I have, he said quietly. His blotchy face whitened. And did you really have 3 wishes granted? Asked Mrs. White. I did, said the sergeant major, his glass tapped against his strong teeth. And has anybody else wished? Persisted the old lady. The first man had his 3 wishes, yes, was the reply. I don't know what the first 2 were, but the third was for death. That's how I got the paw. His tones were so grave that a hush fell upon the group. If you've had your 3 wishes, then it's no good to you now then, Morris, said the old man at last. Why do you keep it for? The soldier shook his head. Fancy, I suppose, he said slowly. I did have some idea of selling it, but I don't think I will. It has caused me enough mischief already. Besides, people won't buy it. They think it's a fairy tale, some of them, and those who don't think anything of it want to try it first and pay me afterward. If you could have another 3 wishes, said the old man, eyeing him keenly, would you have them? I don't know, said the other. I don't know. He took the paw and, dangling it between his forefinger and thumb, suddenly threw it upon the fire. White, with a slight cry, stooped down and snatched it off. Better let it burn, said the soldier solemnly. If you don't want it, Morris, said the other, give it to me. I won't, said his friend doggedly. I threw it on the fire. If you keep it, don't blame me for what happens. Pitch it in the fire like a sensible man. The other shook his head and examined his possession closely. How do you do it? He inquired. Hold it up in your right hand and wish aloud, said the sergeant major. But I warn you of the consequences. Sounds like the Arabian Nights, said Mrs. White as she rose and began to set the supper. Don't you think you might wish for 4 pairs of hands for me? Her husband drew the talisman from his pocket, and all 3 burst into laughter as the sergeant major, with a look of alarm on his face, caught him by the arm. If you must wish, he said gruffly, wish for something sensible. Mr. White dropped it back into his pocket and placing chairs, motioned his friend to the table. In the business of supper, the talisman was partly forgotten, and afterwards, the three sat listening in an enthralled fashion to a second installment of the soldier's adventures in India. If the tale about the monkey's paw is not more truthful than those he has been telling us, said Herbert, as the door closed behind their guests, just in time to catch the last train, we shan't make much out of it. Did you give anything for it, father? Inquired Mrs. White, regarding her husband closely. A trifle, he said. He didn't want it, but I made him take it, and he pressed me again to throw it away. Likely, said Herbert with a pretended horror. Why, we're going to be rich and famous and happy. Wish to be an emperor, father, to begin with. Then you can't be henpecked. He darted around the table, pursued by the maligned Mrs. White. Mr. White took the paw from his pocket and eyed it dubiously. I don't know what to wish for, and that's a fact, he said slowly. It seems to me I've got all I want. If you only cleared the house, you'd be quite happy, wouldn't you? Said Herbert, with his hand on his shoulder. Well, wish for £200 then. That'll just do it. His father, smiling shamefacedly at his own credulity, held up the talisman, as his son, with a solemn face, somewhat marred by a wink at his mother, sat down and struck a few impressive chords. I wish for £200, said the old man distinctly. A fine crash from the piano greeted his words, interrupted by a shuddering cry from the old man. His wife and son ran towards him. It moved, he cried with a glance of disgust at the object laid on the floor. As I wished, it twisted in my hand like a snake. Well, I don't see the money, said his son as he picked it up and placed it on the table. And I bet I never will. It must have been your fancy, father, said his wife, regarding him anxiously. He shook his head. Never mind, though. There's no harm done, but it gave me a shock all the same. They sat down by the fire again, and while the two men finished their pipes, outside the wind was higher than ever, and the old man started nervously at the sound of the door banging upstairs. A silence unusual and depressing settled upon all three, which lasted until the old couple rose to retire for the rest of the night. I'll expect you'll find the cash tied up in a big bag in the middle of your bed, said Herbert, as he bade them good night, and something horrible squatting on top of your wardrobe, watching you as you pocket your ill-gotten gains. He sat alone in the darkness, gazing at the dying fire and seeing faces in it. The last was so horrible and so simian that he gazed at it in amazement. It got so vivid that with a little uneasy laugh, he felt it on the table for a glass containing a little water to throw over it. His hand grasped the monkey's paw, and with a little shiver, he wiped his hand on his coat and went up to bed. In the brightness of the wintry sun the next morning as it streamed over the breakfast table, he laughed at his fears. There was an air of prosaic wholesomeness about the room, which it had lacked on the previous night, and the dirty, shriveled little monkey paw was pitched on the sideboard with a carelessness which betokened no belief in its virtues. I suppose all old soldiers are the same, said Mrs. White. The idea of listening to such nonsense. How could wishes be granted in these days? And if they could, how could £200 hurt you, father? Might drop it on his head from the sky, said the frivolous Herbert. Morris said the things happen so naturally, said his father, that you might, if you so wished, attribute it to coincidence. Well, don't break into the money before I come back, said Herbert as he rose from the table. I'm afraid it'll turn you into a mean, avaricious man, and we shall have to disown you. His mother laughed, and following him to the door, watched him down the road, and returning to the breakfast table, was very happy at the expense of her husband's credulity, all of which did not prevent her from scurrying to the door at the postman's knock, nor prevent her from referring somewhat shortly to retired sergeant majors of bibulous habits when she found that the post brought a tailor's bill. Herbert will have more of his funny remarks, I expect, when he comes home, she said as they sat to dinner. I dare say, said Mr. White, pouring himself out another beer. But for all that, the thing moved in my hand. I'll swear to that. You thought it did, said the old lady soothingly. I say it did, replied the other. There was no thought about it. It had just... What's the matter? His wife made no reply. She was watching the mysterious movements of a man outside who, peering in an undecided fashion at the house, appeared to be trying to make up his mind to enter. In mental connection with the £200, she noticed that the stranger was well dressed and wore a silk hat of glossy newness. 3 times he paused at the gate and then walked on again. The 4th time, he stood with his hand upon it, and then, with sudden resolution, flung it open and walked up the path. Mrs. White at the same moment placed her hands behind her and, hurriedly unfastening the strings of her apron, put that useful article of apparel beneath the cushion of her chair. She brought the stranger, who seemed ill at ease, into the room. He gazed at her furtively and listened in a preoccupied fashion as the old lady apologized for the appearance of the room and her husband's coat, a garment which he usually reserved for the garden. Then she waited patiently as her sex would permit for him to broach his business, but he at first was strangely silent. "I was asked to call," he said at last, and stooped and picked up a piece of cotton from his trousers. "I come from Ma and Megan's." The lady started. "Is there anything the matter?" she asked breathlessly. "Has anything happened to Herbert? What is it?" Her husband interposed. There, mother," he said hastily. "Sit down and don't jump to conclusions. You've not brought bad news, I'm sure, sir," and eyed the other wistfully. I'm sorry," began the visitor. "Is he hurt?" demanded the mother wildly. The visitor bowed in assent. "Badly hurt," he said quietly, "but he is not in any pain." "Oh, thank God," said the old woman, clasping her hands. "Thank God for that. Thank—" She broke off as the sinister meaning of the assurance dawned on her, and she saw the awful confirmation of her fears in the other's averted face. She caught her breath, and turning to her slower-witted husband, laid her trembling hand on his. There was a long silence. "He was caught in the machinery," said the visitor at length in a low voice. "Caught in the machinery?" said Mr. White in a dazed fashion. "Yes." He sat staring out the window, and taking his wife's hand between his, pressed it as he had been wont to in their old courting days nearly 40 years before. "He was the only one left to us," he said, turning gently to the visitor. "This is hard." The other coughed and, rising, walked slowly to the window. "The firm wishes me to convey their sincere sympathy with you in your great loss," he said, without looking round. "I beg that you will understand that I am only their servant and merely obeying orders." There was no reply. The old woman's face was white, her eyes staring, her breath inaudible. On the husband's face was a look such as his friend the sergeant might have carried into his first action. "I was to say that Ma and Megan's disclaim all responsibility," continued the other. "They admit no liability at all, but in consideration of your son's services, they wish to present you with a certain sum as compensation." Mr. White dropped his wife's hand, and rising to his feet, gazed with a look of horror at his visitor. His dry lips shaped the words. "How much?" £200 was the answer. Unconscious of his wife's shriek, the old man smiled faintly, put out his hand like a slightless man, and dropped a senseless heap upon the floor. In the huge new cemetery, some 2 miles distant, the old people buried their dead and came back to the house steeped in shadows and silence. It was all over so quickly that at first they could hardly realize it, and remained in a state of expectation as though something else to happen, something else which has to lighten this load, too heavy for all hearts to bear. But the days had passed and expectations gave way to resignation. Sometimes they hardly exchanged for a word, for now they had nothing to talk about, and their days were long to weariness. It was about a week after that the old man, waking suddenly in the night, stretched out his hand and found himself alone. The room was in darkness, and the sound of subdued weeping came from the window. He raised himself in bed and listened. "Come back," he said tenderly. "You will be cold." "It's colder for you, my son," said the old woman, and wept afresh. The sounds of her sobs died away on his ears. The bed was warm and his eyes heavy with sleep. He dozed fitfully and then slept until a sudden wild cry from his wife awoke him with a start. "The paw!" she cried wildly. "The monkey's paw!" He started up in alarm. Where is it? What's the matter?" She came stumbling across the room towards him. "I want it," she said quietly. "You've not destroyed it?" "It's in the parlor, on the bracket," he replied, marveling. "Why?" She cried in laughter together, and bending over, kissed his cheek. I've only just thought of it, she said hysterically. Why didn't I think of it before? Why didn't you think of it? Think of what? He questioned. The other 2 wishes, she replied rapidly. We've only had one. Was that not enough? He demanded fiercely. No, she cried triumphantly. We'll have one more. Go down and get it quickly and wish our boy alive again. The man sat in his bed and flung the bedclothes from his quaking limbs. Good God, you are mad, he cried aghast. Get it, she panted. Get it quickly and wish. Oh, my boy, my boy. Her husband struck a match and lit a candle. Go back to bed, he said unsteadily. You don't know what you're saying. We had the first wish granted, said the old woman feverishly. Why not the second? A coincidence, stammered the old man. Get it and wish, cried his wife, quivering with excitement. The old man turned and regarded her. His voice shook. He has been dead for 10 days. And besides, I would not tell you else, but I could only recognize him by his clothing. If he was too terrible for you to see then, how now? Bring him back, cried the old woman, and dragged him towards the door. Do you think I fear the child I have nursed? He went down into the darkness and felt his way to the parlor and then to the mantelpiece. The talisman was in its place, and a horrible fear that the unspoken wish might bring his mutilated son before him ere he could escape from the room seized upon him, and he caught his breath as he found that he had lost direction of the door. His brow cold with sweat, he felt his way around the table and groped along the wall until he found himself in the small passage with the unwholesome thing in his hand. Even his wife's face seemed to change as he entered the room. It was white and expectant, and to his fears seemed to have an unnatural look upon it. He was afraid of her. Wish, she cried in a strong voice. It's foolish and wicked, he faltered. Wish, repeated his wife. He raised his hand. I wish my son alive again. The talisman fell to the floor, and he regarded it fearfully. Then he sank trembling into a chair as the old woman, with burning eyes, walked to the window and raised the blind. He sat until he was chilled with the cold, glancing occasionally at the figure of the old woman peering through the window. The candle end, which had burned below the rim of the china candlestick, was throwing pulsating shadows at the ceiling and walls, until with a flicker, larger than the rest, it expired. The old man, with an unspeakable sense of relief at the failure of the talisman, crept back into his bed, and a minute afterward the old woman came silently and apathetically beside him. Neither spoke, but lay silently listening to the ticking of the clock. A stair creaked, and a squeaky mouse scurried noisily through the wall. The darkness was oppressive, and after lying for some time screwing up his courage, he took the box of matches and, striking one, went downstairs for a candle. At the foot of the stairs the match went out, and he paused to strike another, and at the same moment a knock so quiet and stealthily as to be scarcely audible sounded from the front door. The matches fell from his hand and spilled into the passage. He stood motionless, his breath suspended until the knock was repeated. Then he turned and fled swiftly back to his room and closed the door behind him. A third knock sounded through the house. "What's that?" cried the old woman, starting up. "A rat," said the old man in shaking tones. "A rat. It passed me on the stairs." His wife sat up in bed listening. A loud knock resounded through the house. "It's Herbert!" She ran to the door, but her husband was before her and, catching her by the arm, held her tightly. "What are you going to do?" he whispered hoarsely. "It's my boy. It's Herbert," she cried, struggling mechanically. "I forgot it was 2 miles away. What are you holding me for? Let go. I must open the door." "For God's sakes, don't let it in," cried the old man, trembling. "You are afraid of your own son?" she cried, struggling. "Let me go. I'm coming for Herbert. I'm coming." There was another knock, and another. The old woman, with a sudden wrench, broke free and ran from the room. Her husband followed to the landing and called after her appealingly as she hurried down the stairs. He heard the chain rattle back and the bolt drawn slowly and stiffly from the socket. Then the old woman's voice, strained and panting. "The bolt," she cried loudly. "Come down, I can't reach it." But her husband was on his hands and knees, groping wildly on the floor in search of the paw. If only he could find it before the thing outside got in. A perfect sound of knocks reverberated throughout the house, and as he heard the scraping of a chair as his wife put it down in the passage against the door, he heard the creaking of the bolt as it came slowly back, and at the same moment he found the monkey's paw and frantically breathed his third and last wish. The knocking ceased suddenly, although the echoes of it were still in the house. He heard the chain drawn back and the door opened. A cold wind rushed up the staircase, and a long, loud wail of disappointment and misery from his wife gave him the courage to run down to her side, and then to the gate beyond. The street lamp flickering opposite shone on a quiet and deserted road.
Thank you for listening to tonight's episode. I hope it was spooky enough for you guys. I will see you hopefully in the next episode. Stay spooky. Goodbye.